A massive 400-pound black bear stands face to face with the woman who saved his life 5 years ago. His powerful paws could crush bone with a single swipe. His jaw could snap a man in half. But instead, he does something that will make your heart skip a beat. He gently places his enormous head against her chest, closes his eyes, and lets out the softest whimper you've ever heard. This is the moment that changed everything we thought we knew about the bond between humans and wild animals. Before we dive into this incredible story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications to catch more heartwarming stories like this one. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Let me take you back to where this extraordinary journey began. It was a crisp October morning in the mountains of Montana, 2019. Sarah Mitchell, a 34-year-old wildlife photographer, was hiking through Glacier National Park, her camera bag slung over her shoulder, searching for the perfect shot of autumn's golden display. Sarah had been doing this for 12 years. She knew these mountains like the back of her hand. She understood the rhythms of the forest, the sounds that meant danger, and the silence that meant peace. But nothing could have prepared her for what she was about to discover. As she rounded a bend near Crystal Lake, her trained ear caught something unusual, a sound that made her blood run cold. It was a cry, high-pitched and desperate, echoing through the valley like a plea for help. But this wasn't human. This was something else entirely. Following the sound deeper into the wilderness, Sarah's heart began to race. She'd heard stories, terrible stories, of what happened to cubs when their mothers didn't return. And as she pushed through a thicket of pine branches, her worst fears were confirmed. There, huddled against the base of a massive Douglas fir, was the tiniest black bear cub she'd ever seen. His fur was matted with mud and pine needles. His little body was shaking uncontrollably, not just from the cold, but from pure terror and exhaustion. But it was his eyes that broke Sarah's heart completely. Those dark, innocent eyes that held a mixture of hope and resignation that no baby animal should ever have to feel. The cub couldn't have been more than 8 weeks old. In the wild, cubs this young never leave their mother's side. They depend on her for everything: warmth, protection, food, and most importantly, the knowledge of how to survive. Without her, this little one may be hours, not days, before hypothermia or predators would claim him. Sarah knew the rules. Every wildlife photographer knows them by heart. Don't interfere with nature. Don't get involved. Let nature take its course, no matter how heartbreaking it might be. But as she watched this tiny creature struggle to stay alive, every instinct in her body screamed at her to do something. For what felt like an eternity, Sarah crouched behind that tree, her camera forgotten in her hands, watching this little cub fight for his life. She scanned the surrounding area desperately, hoping against hope that Mama Bear would come crashing through the underbrush at any moment, but the forest remained eerily quiet. You have to understand something about Sarah. She wasn't just any photographer. She'd grown up on her grandfather's farm in rural Montana, bottle-feeding orphaned calves and nursing injured wildlife back to health. Her grandfather, old William Mitchell, used to say, "Sarah girl, sometimes the greatest act of love is knowing when to break the rules." As the hours ticked by and the temperature began to drop, Sarah faced the most difficult decision of her life. She could walk away, follow protocol, and let nature decide this cub's fate. Or she could risk it all, her career, her reputation, possibly even her freedom, to save a life that maybe, just maybe, deserved a fighting chance. The moment that changed everything came when the little cub looked directly at her. Despite his weakness, despite his fear, he somehow sensed her presence, and instead of running or cowering, he did something that shattered every wall Sarah had built around her heart. He took one tiny, shaking step toward her, then another, until he collapsed just feet from where she was hiding. That was it. The decision was made. Sarah slowly emerged from her hiding spot, moving with the careful precision of someone who understood that one wrong move could mean disaster. She kept her voice low and soothing, the same tone she'd used with frightened animals her entire life. "Hey there, little guy," she whispered, her breath visible in the cold mountain air. "I know you're scared. I know you don't understand what's happening, but I promise you I'm not going to hurt you." The cub's response was heartbreaking. Instead of fleeing, he actually crawled closer, his tiny body trembling with the effort. It was as if he understood that this human was his last hope, his final chance at survival. What happened next goes against every piece of conventional wisdom about human-wildlife interaction, but sometimes love doesn't follow the rules. Sarah carefully removed her heavy winter jacket and gently wrapped it around the shivering cub. The moment the warmth enveloped his tiny body, he did something that brought tears to Sarah's eyes. He nuzzled against her chest and for the first time in who knows how long, stopped crying. Getting him down the mountain was a challenge that would test every ounce of Sarah's strength and determination. The cub, who she'd already started calling Charlie after her late grandfather Charles, was weak but not unconscious. Every few hundred yards, she'd have to stop and let him rest, offering him small sips of water from her bottle and speaking to him in that same gentle tone that seemed to calm his fears. But the real challenge wasn't the 3-mile hike to her truck. It wasn't even the frantic drive to the emergency veterinary clinic in Kalispell. The real challenge was what came next, because saving Charlie meant taking on a system that wasn't designed for situations like this. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the veterinarian who examined Charlie that night, delivered news that was both heartbreaking and hopeful. The cub was severely malnourished and dehydrated. He had several infected wounds from what appeared to be a predator attack, likely the same incident that had separated him from his mother. But he was young, and with proper care, he had a real chance at survival. The problem: Montana law strictly prohibits the private care of wild bears, even orphaned cubs. The standard protocol was to either return him to the wild, which would mean certain death for a cub this young, or, more likely, humane euthanasia. But Dr. Walsh saw something in Sarah's eyes that night, the same fierce determination that had driven her to break the rules in the first place. Instead of making the call to Fish and Wildlife, she made a different choice. "I'm going to give you 72 hours, she told Sarah. "Use that time to find a solution, because after that, I'll have to report this." Those 72 hours became the most intense period of Sarah's life. While Charlie slept in a makeshift den in her guest bedroom, wrapped in heating blankets and fed every 2 hours with a special formula Dr. Walsh had provided, Sarah worked the phones like her life depended on it. She called every wildlife sanctuary, every rehabilitation center, every contact she'd made in 12 years of wildlife photography. The answer was always the same. No one could legally take in a black bear cub without proper permits. And those permits took months to obtain, months that Charlie simply didn't have. But sometimes, when you're fighting for something truly important, the universe conspires to help you. On the third day, just as Sarah was beginning to lose hope, she received a call that would change everything. The caller was Dr. Robert Hayes, director of the Rocky Mountain Wildlife Sanctuary, a facility about 4 hours south of Sarah's cabin. He'd heard about her situation through Dr. Walsh, and he had a proposition that was both risky and brilliant. "Here's what I can offer," Dr. Hayes explained. "We can't officially take Charlie without the proper paperwork, but I need a wildlife photographer for a documentary project about bear rehabilitation. The project would require you to work closely with our bears, including any cubs we might be caring for. Are you following me?" Sarah was following him perfectly. By hiring her as a contractor, the sanctuary could legally house Charlie while she documented his rehabilitation. It wasn't exactly by the book, but it was legal enough to protect everyone involved.
The next morning, Sarah loaded Charlie into a specially designed carrier and made the drive to the sanctuary. She expected it to be heartbreaking, saying goodbye to the little creature who had already stolen her heart. What she didn't expect was what Charlie did when she tried to leave him in his new enclosure. As Sarah prepared to leave Charlie in his new home, something extraordinary happened that would define their relationship for years to come. The moment she placed him in the specially designed habitat, complete with climbing structures, a small den, and everything a growing bear cub could need, Charlie did something that stunned everyone watching. He followed her to the fence and began to cry. Not the desperate wails of a frightened animal, but the heartbroken sobs of a child calling for his mother. When Sarah knelt down beside the enclosure, Charlie pressed his tiny body against the chain link, reaching his little paws through to touch her face. Dr. Hayes, who had worked with orphaned bears for over 20 years, had never seen anything like it. "In all my experience," he told Sarah, "I've never seen a bond form this quickly or this completely. This isn't just imprinting. This is something deeper." What followed was the most unconventional rehabilitation program in the sanctuary's history. Instead of minimizing human contact to prepare Charlie for eventual release, Dr. Hayes made a radical decision. He would allow Sarah to work with Charlie daily, documenting not just his physical development, but the unique relationship they'd formed. Over the following months, Sarah witnessed Charlie's transformation from a traumatized, nearly dead cub into a playful, intelligent, and remarkably social young bear. But more than that, she watched him display behaviors that challenged everything experts thought they knew about bear intelligence and emotional capacity. Charlie seemed to understand when Sarah was sad or stressed. On days when the documentary work was particularly challenging, he would bring her gifts, interesting rocks, pretty leaves, or sometimes just sit quietly beside her, his massive paw resting on her arm in what could only be described as comfort. By his first birthday, Charlie weighed nearly 150 pounds and stood 3 feet tall on his hind legs. He was healthy, strong, and, by all accounts, ready for life in the wild. But there was one problem that no one had anticipated. Charlie had no interest whatsoever in being a wild bear. As Charlie's second birthday approached, the question that everyone had been avoiding could no longer be ignored. What do you do with a 250-pound black bear who thinks he's part of a human family? Traditional rehabilitation focuses on teaching orphaned animals to fear humans, to hunt for themselves, and to integrate with others of their species. Charlie had mastered some of these skills. He was an excellent forager and had even learned to fish from the sanctuary's pond. But he showed absolutely no fear of humans, and, more problematically, he showed no interest in the other bears at the facility. The breaking point came during what was supposed to be Charlie's final evaluation before release. Dr. Hayes brought in a team of wildlife experts to assess Charlie's readiness for life in the wild. The test was simple. Place Charlie in a large, naturalistic enclosure and observe his behavior when humans approached. A normal bear would retreat, show signs of stress, or, at the very least, maintain a healthy distance. Charlie did none of these things. Instead, he approached the observation window and began what could only be described as showing off, climbing, playing, and even performing little tricks he'd learned during his time with Sarah. "This isn't a wild animal," one of the evaluators concluded. "This is a 250-pound pet who happens to be one of the most dangerous predators in North America." The recommendation was clear. Charlie could never be released into the wild. He lacked the natural fear responses that would keep him safe from humans, and, more dangerously, he lacked the natural behaviors that would keep humans safe from him. But that left everyone with an even bigger problem. What do you do with an unreleasable bear who has bonded with a human? The answer came from an unexpected source. During one of Sarah's photographic sessions with Charlie, she received a visitor who would change both their lives forever. Emma Rodriguez was a documentary filmmaker from National Geographic, and she'd heard about Charlie's story through Dr. Hayes. "I want to propose something that's going to sound crazy," Emma told Sarah as they watched Charlie perform his afternoon routine of mock hunting, where he would stalk and capture various toys Sarah had brought him over the years. Emma's proposal was indeed crazy, but it was also brilliant. She wanted to create a long-term documentary series about Charlie, not just his rehabilitation, but his life as an unreleasable bear and the unprecedented relationship he'd formed with Sarah. The project would provide the funding needed to build Charlie a permanent home at the sanctuary, while also contributing valuable research about human-wildlife bonds. More importantly, it would allow Sarah to remain a part of Charlie's life indefinitely. The decision wasn't easy. It meant that Sarah would have to relocate to be closer to the sanctuary. It meant restructuring her entire career around one very special bear. And it meant acknowledging that Charlie would never be truly wild, never experience the life that nature had intended for him. But it also meant that Charlie would never be alone again. 5 years later, as Sarah reflects on the journey that brought them together, Charlie's home at the Rocky Mountain Wildlife Sanctuary has become something unprecedented in wildlife care. His enclosure spans nearly 10 acres of natural forest, complete with streams, caves, and climbing structures that challenge even his considerable abilities. But the most remarkable aspect of Charlie's life isn't his physical environment. It's the work he's doing to change how we think about wildlife rehabilitation and human-animal bonds. Charlie has become an ambassador for orphaned wildlife, helping to raise awareness and funding for rehabilitation programs across the country. His story has inspired changes in policy that allow for more flexible approaches to animals who can't be released. More than that, his relationship with Sarah has contributed to groundbreaking research about animal intelligence, emotional capacity, and the complex ways that trauma and rescue can shape behavior in wild animals. 3 times a week, Sarah enters Charlie's enclosure for what they call enrichment sessions. To an outside observer, these might look like play dates between a woman and her pet bear, but they're actually carefully structured interactions designed to provide Charlie with the mental stimulation and social connection that his unique situation requires. During these sessions, Charlie displays behaviors that continue to amaze researchers. He's learned to paint, holding brushes in his massive paws to create abstract art that's been exhibited in galleries across the region. He's mastered complex puzzle games that test his problem-solving abilities. And most remarkably, he seems to understand the camera equipment that Sarah uses to document their time together, often positioning himself for better shots or even appearing to pose for photographs. Which brings us back to that moment I described at the beginning of this story. The moment when a 400-pound black bear gently pressed his massive head against the chest of the woman who saved his life. It happened during what Sarah thought was just another routine photographic session. She'd been documenting Charlie's morning routine when she noticed he seemed different, more quieter, more contemplative than usual. Instead of his normal playful energy, he moved with a deliberate calm that she had never seen from him before. When she knelt down to check the settings on her camera, Charlie approached her slowly, with none of his usual boisterous enthusiasm. For a moment, Sarah felt a flicker of concern. In the 5 years they'd been together, Charlie had never shown any aggression toward humans, but he was still a powerful predator, and animals could be unpredictable. But instead of anything threatening, Charlie did something that took Sarah's breath away. He lowered his massive head until it rested against her chest, closed his eyes, and released the softest, most contented sigh he had ever heard from him. For nearly 10 minutes, they stayed like that. A woman and a bear sharing a moment of perfect peace and understanding. It was as if Charlie was saying thank you, not just for saving his life, but for giving him a life worth living. Dr. Hayes, who witnessed the interaction, later said it was the most profound display of cross-species bonding he'd ever observed. What I saw that day challenged everything I thought I knew about the emotional lives of wild animals, he explained. That wasn't just trust or even affection. That was gratitude, expressed in the most genuine way possible. Today, Charlie's story has inspired wildlife rehabilitation centers around the world to reconsider their approaches to unreleasable animals. The Charlie Protocol, as it's become known, provides guidelines for creating enriched, long-term care situations for wild animals who can't return to nature but shouldn't be euthanized. Sarah's documentation of Charlie's life has become the foundation for a new field of study, interspecies emotional intelligence, that's changing how we understand the relationships between humans and wild animals. But perhaps most importantly, Charlie's story has reminded us that sometimes the most important thing we can do is simply refuse to give up on a life that others might consider lost. The little cub who was hours away from death has grown into a magnificent bear who serves as an ambassador for his species and a living testament to the power of compassion. He's helped raise over $2 million for wildlife rehabilitation programs. His story has educated countless people about the challenges facing orphaned wildlife, and his unique relationship with Sarah continues to provide valuable insights into animal behavior and intelligence. Every morning, when Sarah arrives at the sanctuary, Charlie greets her with the same enthusiasm he's shown since he was a tiny cub. Despite weighing nearly 400 pounds and possessing the strength to crush a car, he still brings her gifts, interesting rocks, beautiful feathers, or sometimes just a perfectly shaped stick that caught his attention during his morning exploration. And every evening, as the sun sets over the Montana mountains, Sarah sits with Charlie in their special spot overlooking the valley where their journey began. Sometimes they play. Sometimes they work on Charlie's latest art project or puzzle. But sometimes they simply sit together in comfortable silence, a woman and a bear who found each other when they both needed it most. Charlie's story reminds us that love doesn't always follow the rules, and sometimes the most important thing we can do is trust our hearts instead of our heads. It shows us that even in a world that often seems cold and indifferent, there's still room for compassion, for taking risks, and for believing that every life has value. But Charlie's story is also a reminder that wildlife rehabilitation is about more than just individual animals. It's about preserving the intricate web of life that connects us all. Every orphaned animal represents not just one tragedy, but a symptom of larger environmental challenges that affect entire ecosystems. The work that Sarah and Dr. Hayes do at the Rocky Mountain Wildlife Sanctuary is just one example of the critical conservation efforts happening around the world. From orphaned elephants in Africa to injured sea turtles in the Pacific, dedicated people are working every day to give wildlife a second chance. If Charlie's story has touched your heart, there are ways you can help make a difference. Wildlife rehabilitation centers across the country rely on donations and volunteers to continue their vital work. Even a small contribution can mean the difference between life and death for an animal in need. You can also help by being aware of wildlife in your own community. If you encounter injured or orphaned animals, contact your local wildlife rehabilitation center immediately. Don't try to help on your own. These are trained professionals who know how to provide the care these animals need. And perhaps most importantly, you can help by sharing stories like Charlie's. Every time someone learns about the incredible work being done to help wildlife, we create another advocate for conservation, another voice speaking up for animals who can't speak for themselves. Charlie may have started as one tiny cub who needed help, but his story has grown into something much larger, a symbol of hope, a testament to the power of compassion, and a reminder that sometimes the most important thing we can do is simply refuse to give up. The next time you see a news story about environmental destruction or wildlife habitat loss or species extinction, remember Charlie. Remember that behind every statistic is an individual life, a unique personality, a being capable of forming bonds, feeling gratitude, and bringing joy to the world in ways we're only beginning to understand. Charlie's story isn't just about one woman who saved one bear. It's about all of us and the choice we make every day between indifference and compassion, between following the rules and following our hearts, between giving up and fighting for what's right. In a world that desperately needs more love, more hope, and more people willing to take risks for the sake of others, Charlie's story lights the way forward. It reminds us that sometimes the smallest act of kindness can change everything, and that love, in all its forms, really can conquer all. Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey. If this story moved you, please consider sharing it with others who might need to hear Charlie's message of hope. And remember, in a world full of abandoned cubs, both literal and metaphorical, each of us has the power to be someone's Sarah, someone's second chance, someone's reason to believe in love again. Charlie and Sarah's story continues every day at the Rocky Mountain Wildlife Sanctuary, where a woman and a bear prove that family isn't always about blood, that love doesn't always follow logic, and that sometimes the most important thing we can do is simply show up for someone who needs us. Until next time, keep your hearts open, your compassion strong, and never forget that every life, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant, has the potential to change the world.